Welcome to the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Chalmers, a shoulder and elbow surgeon at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Rachel Frank, a sports and shoulder surgeon at the University of Colorado in Denver. Rachel, how are you?
Pete, doing fantastic. How are you tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great. Before I get started, I should mention that the views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons Society, the University of Utah, the University of Colorado, or the institutions of any of our guests. Today we have a special episode for you on a topic that is near and dear to all of us, which is mentorship. We invited two surgeons that have been mentors to hundreds of trainees, but more specifically been mentors to both of us, and for both of us have been really instrumental in our growth. First, we have Dr. Charles Bush-Joseph, who's a sports and shoulder surgeon at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. Dr. Bush-Joseph, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Peter. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, we're really happy to have you. In addition, we have Dr. Jay Keener, who's a shoulder surgeon at Washington University in St. Louis. Dr. Keener, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rachel, for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us. And we're super excited to chat with you both about mentorship. It's important to us. And you both have been, as Pete said, instrumental in our careers, in our lives, and in our growth and development. We'd like to start by asking each of you, and first we'll start with you, Dr. Bush-Joseph. When do you feel like you first became a mentor? When did you have that moment, or has it just been something that's evolved?
I think it's something that evolves, actually, because, throughout my career, and I'm near the tail end of my career, early on, I felt I could be a mentor to younger residents and fellows and medical students and high school students who were trailing me, whether it be 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years, because I had gone through the mill or the experiences that they were about to go through. Certainly, I was not ready to be a mentor for anybody in terms of the larger world, whether we consider our association, our national societies, even dealing with the local politics of a medical center or department. So I think, your target mentee is somebody that you're comfortable with, and they have to look up to you, whether it be out of immediate recognition or a longer term personal relationship.
And Dr. Keener, how about you? When do you feel like you first became a mentor? Was there a moment? Was there someone that you mentored that you were like, yeah, I'm doing it. This is happening. Or was it more, more over time that you felt that you developed into that role?
It was interesting. I thought about this topic a little bit before the podcast, and I think the first time that I felt like I really looked up and mentored or was a mentee to somebody was when I was a junior resident during residencies. Like some of the senior residents that you're paired with on your teams, you saw how they did things, how they took care of patients, how they handled clinics, how they carried themselves. And I realized that you become a mentor when you're a senior resident. And a lot of that, you don't realize that it's happening, that you've kind of evolved into that role. But I think when you're a senior resident, is probably the first time you are indirectly a mentor to the junior residents. So it starts off early, and then it becomes a lot more formalized when you become an attending faculty member.
So speaking of mentors, Dr. Keenan, who along the way was one of your biggest mentors, and what are some of the things you think you learned from them about how to mentor people properly, or how to give people the best advice?
I think probably the biggest mentor that stands out to me was Ken Yamaguchi. So he was my fellowship director and responsible for the majority of my training during fellowship. And I think I learned a lot on kind of indirectly from him and how to be a good mentor. I think I learned also, I think people that are your mentors, sometimes you learn what you want to do, but also what you don't want to do as a mentor sometimes. So I think there's a give and take. There's a plus and minus relationship. And I think that was Dr. Yamaguchi taught me a lot about leadership skills and how to get plugged into the society and what it takes to he mentored me very, very well early in my career. So for that, I'm very grateful. But I learned a lot, both directly and indirectly from him, I think.
What about you, Dr. Bush-Joseph? As you were coming up through your training, who was your most important mentor?
I'd have to say there were two people because, mentors, they generally have a big influence of where you're going, and sometimes they actually help you change directions. And one for me is Ed Voitis, who's at the University of Michigan. I was a medical student there at the time, and I had already planned on, or I already had applied to internal medicine residency because I thought back then, a long time ago, they were the smart guys. And I met Ed on a rotation, and Ed really took took a liking to me, and really just helped open an eye up for me, and really gave me good, solid counseling, without trying to sway me. Just gave me lots and lots of information, and then so that helped me make a career choice. And then obviously Bernie Bach. Obviously, Bernie was a young attending, brand new when I was a third year resident, and I didn't. I thought Bernie was, a seasoned professor when he got there, but it just shows you the timing that I lined up well with him, and I think he identified me, and we developed a relationship that obviously has gone to for over 30, 35 years.
Yeah, that brings up a good topic. When I started off in my schooling, I was a physical therapist for a while, and it's interesting you say that because I had no intentions of becoming a physician when I first entered the medical field, and there was a mentor that Dr. Bill Post, who was a sports medicine physician at West Virginia University, and I got to shadow him in his clinics, and it was amazing to see kind of taking orthopedics to another level. As a PT student, I was very impressed by what an orthopedic surgeon could do over and above what a physical therapist could do. So that was a large influence on me to choose orthopedic surgery as a specialty. So I think that was a mentorship that I did that happened early on in my career that was very influential to where I am now.
Peter, if I may just add, though, I would say that, and obviously I don't want to make mention of, but specifically, but I had some negative mentors that people that when I was very young, who for whatever reason I sort of met and became and had lots of contact with, and they wanted to guide me, but I honestly didn't like the directions they were guiding me, and so I think that the mentee or a young orthopedic surgeon, your job is to sample. And just like, I hate to say it, being at a buffet or at a cookie shop, you're gonna say, I really like that cookie. I tried a bunch of them, and that's the cookie I like. And so it's not just oh yeah, the mentor's got great destination to where his mentee is going to be, and that's generally not the case. So I think, as Jay was saying, that certain people are influences on you, but you're ripe and ready to be influenced. And sometimes it's positive, and sometimes it's negative. But it's the young surgeon or the young trainee. They've got to make those value decisions on what advice or what directions they really like.
One of the things I love about both of the stories you told is how drastically altered the courses of your lives were by those mentors, that both of you were heading in different directions. Dr. Joseph, it sounds like you were going to be an internist. Dr. Keener, you were a physical therapist. And now you are doing something completely different than what you would have been doing had you continued on those paths. Have you found that that's also been true of the mentor-mentee relationships, that you can point to individuals, you say, I feel like I really made a difference in that person's life? Dr. Joseph, you first.
I have, and just again, I'm very old, and so I just having lots and lots of kids come through my office. I generally have lots of high school kids who spend summers with me and chasing me around, and even college kids who are trying to get in medical school. And the opportunity that I can provide them is that, yes, they can talk to me, an old guy who's got grizzled experiences, but generally I have a medical student with me, a junior resident or a senior resident, and occasionally a fellow. So it allows these younger people to get that mentor sampling, and for many patients, for many young residents, like when young Rachel Frank, when she was a resident, Rachel found the smart senior residents and the smart fellows who helped foster her career. And I think Rachel would tell you she was able to sample, but there's quite a few that I can think in particular that have helped. And there's nothing better, I'd be honest with you, in my role, to get that call or that email, I just got into medical school, or I just matched somewhere. You're just beaming like you would be happy when your child hits such a milestone. So I can't tell you how self-rewarding it is to be a mentor, especially in our field.
How about you, Dr. Keenerman? Have you found mentoring to be a rewarding process?
Absolutely. I think the thing that stands out is when you have a medical student who's rotating on your rotation as a third or fourth year, and they're kind of undecided, but they really click on your rotation and they choose orthopedics as a specialty. I think that that's very rewarding. and it's nice to be able to help them through the process of residency matching and choosing a program that fits with them. Likewise, when you're dealing with junior residents and they happen to really enjoy your particular field of medicine, of in my case, shoulder and elbow, and they choose that as a career path. I think that's very rewarding. It's nice to kind of play a formative role in their career development. So that's very rewarding for sure.
What do you both find is the most difficult part of mentoring? There's a lot of rewarding aspects, and you both have just highlighted just a few of them, but I think that have strongly impacted each of you. And I know Pete and I have had some limited experience with this as our careers grow and we've mentored individuals. But there are some difficult components. What have you guys found is the most difficult? Dr. Keener, how about we start with you? What's difficult about mentoring for you, and what advice do you have for our listeners in that regard?
I think when you're mentoring junior faculty, so when we've hired a couple of young shoulder and elbow attendings, I think the important thing is that you need to align your mentorship influences along their career goals, and not everybody has the same career goals as you do. So not everybody has a strong focus in research or wants to do a traveling fellowship, for example. Or it's important that you take time to spend actual time discussing their career goals and making sure that you can help foster their career development, even if it doesn't necessarily align with the goals that you have or the path that you took. So I think just remaining objective and trying to become a mentor that's malleable to the goals of the person that you're trying to, the mentee, I think is something that takes a conscious effort to take a step back and assume that role.
And Dr. Bashosef, what about you? What have you found difficult about mentoring, apart from, the constant phone calls, texts, and emails that you might get from a certain former resident or fellow about cases? What other things do you find difficult about mentoring?
It's hard sometimes when, the person that you're trying to help and influence is on a negative path, for whatever reason that the circumstances that they're in is just, they're in a bit of a downward spiral, either emotionally or perceptually. And sometimes you have to, you got to be the parent in the room in that sense and just say, I disagree. A job of a mentor is not a cheerleading and pure affirmation. Oh yeah, you're great, you're great, you're great. Because part of being a mentor is that what makes us different than a life coach or a counselor. We're supposed to have knowledge of the space or the decision making that's being made. So, a life coach is going to tell you, well, how do you feel about this decision? Our job is to sometimes say, that's a bad choice. This is not going to work. You're hitting a wall, and you have to recognize that wall. And you want to do that without sort of damaging the perceptual relationship that you have with who you're trying to counsel.
To follow up on that, one of the, I think, hot topics in medicine in general, not just orthopedic surgery and not just shoulder and elbow surgery or upper extremity surgery, is the idea of having not only a mentor, but a surgeon coach. And there's companies that do this. There's individuals that do this. There's a lot of attention paid to this, almost like in other fields, a life coach or something like that, but surgeon coaches. Do you guys think that this is something that is helpful for residents, fellows, or young faculty? Is this something that should be implemented, or do you think mentorship covers that role for most surgeons? So kind of coaching versus mentorship. What are your thoughts on that? Dr. Bashosef, let's go back to you because you were just talking about that a little bit.
Well, I think a mentor can be both, but I do think that sometimes you just need a technical coach. I'll freely admit, Jay Keener is a much better shoulder surgeon than I am. I mean, he's very experienced at some sophisticated things that came after my training and that I don't have the same level of. And yet I would depend on him for that expertise in a procedure that I'm not as familiar with. By the same token, though, you still want to have somebody who you have confidence in that understands the anxieties that you have and also experiences and how you've made decisions before. So I think there's a role for both. A mentor can be both, but if they don't have that necessary skill, I know who I'm going to ask questions about a particular procedure, a particular problem. Whereas other people, I may ask them about that problem, but I don't really trust their judgment over, political or financial or departmental type moves. So I think you can have both. I am a little leery, and I'll be honest with you, over the concept of industry sponsored um, coaches. Only in a sense is that you have to say that yes, in 99% of the time it probably works out great because it's a trusted surgeon, is very experienced, but their implicit bias and they're being paid for to guide you to say yes, technique X using implant X is the best way to go, and so I think that's the number one job of a mentor. It has to say that any advice I give, I will not personally profit by. Now, there's times I love Peter. When Peter was a resident, he's fabulous. I knew if I gave Peter an assignment, he was going to nail it. And yes, I would probably was rewarded by it. But hopefully Peter didn't have the thought that I was giving him the assignment just to make me look good. And that's the hard thing. And when you have an industry relationship there, it's a little tough. And so that's the one nervousness I have on that topic. So I'd be interested in Jay's thoughts.
No, I agree wholeheartedly with what you've said. I think, in this age of digital media, we sometimes our surgeon coaches are sometimes techniques that we see on the internet. How do we execute this surgery with this deformity or with this complex problem? And sometimes you're relying on your peers and your friends and the internet to kind of help you through that. But I would draw a delineation or a line between that and what a true mentor does, which is, as Dr. Fitzjoseph said, is an unbiased opinion on specific techniques or pathways to help guide your career. So, I mean, surgeon coaches definitely play a role, but I think that it doesn't really supplant the value of a mentor.
Dr. Keener, you were a critical mentor to me during fellowship, and I learned so much from you. But I can probably appreciate how it's, I know that you're a critical piece also of the residency at WashU and how it's probably very different to interact with a fellow versus a resident. Tell us how you approach those two different relationships differently.
I think a lot of times with residents, your goal is just to kind of get them reps in the clinic and in the OR, make them proficient surgeons in the basic surgical techniques, teach them how to think, teach them the nuts and bolts of your specific specialty. With the fellowship, though, a lot of times the fellows that we train are going into academics or they're going into specialty private practice. And I think that for them, the mentorship is deeper. So you have to give them guidance not only on how to be a good surgeon in their particular field, but how to choose the right job, how to, once they have the right job, if they're in academics, for example, how to make a difference in their society, how to get their foot in the door. There's a lot of different pathways that you have to mentor them in building relationships with other surgeons, becoming involved in the society, building a practice. There's a lot more that goes into it with fellowship mentorship. And I think that obviously we've been blessed that the fellows that we've had here at WashU, and Peter, you're a perfect example. Sometimes people have such innate skill that they don't require a whole lot of mentorship. They just need a little bit of guidance. But I think fellowship mentorship just takes it to another level as opposed to residency mentorship. Residency is important, obviously, but your fellowship mentorship is a lifelong relationship that you develop with somebody, I think, especially in a small society like Shoulder and Elbow, where you're constantly going to be collaborating and you're a member of a society that has, very targeted goals and limited membership. So that relationship is long lasting.
Peter, I would just add on that I think a mentor like Dr. Keener helps you understand quickly that the world, as you continue to ascend higher and higher in your training, that your world is actually getting smaller and smaller, and that you have to realize that small behaviors or small decisions can have more lasting effects when the circle of influence in your society is only a couple hundred. I'm in a larger society, say AOSSM, which is 3,600, where ASES is 400. And of those who are high level academic players, it's a much smaller even segment. So understanding the size of the field you're playing in, and who are important relationships to establish is critical. And again, that's where a mentor like Dr. Keener can help you navigate that early on, because you don't understand that at the front end when you're an entering fellow. You're worried about, geez, will I be a good surgeon? Will I be a good doctor or not? But once you sort of cross that halfway point of fellowship, your anxieties, where am I going to be? What's my practice going to be like? How will it develop? What sphere of influence will I have? And those are complex times, because you're trying to refine your skills and knowledge base of being a good doctor. But now I'm thinking not about the next year. What's the next 5 to 20 years going to be? And that's hard. It's very, this time of year, fellows have high levels of anxiety until they, quote, sign on the line and have a job. Then all of a sudden they exhale. It's kind of like a fourth year medical student that's already got matched. Your blood pressure and your pulse go down 20, 30 points.
I think that's such an interesting topic you bring up, and certainly an important one that I sometimes wish people had told me about earlier, is how small the field is and how often you can say something and it can, you cannot mean something by it, but it can quickly come back around, back at you quicker than you think. So certainly, I think that's great advice, and I wish you told me that 3 years ago. But yeah.
Peter, I may have told you. I don't know if you heard it.
Probably right. Probably you told me and I wasn't listening. Yeah, that sounds more accurate.
Let me ask you guys. Pete was asking you about mentoring residents and fellows, and I think the advice is phenomenal. And I certainly have benefited from that greatly with my time, under Dr. Bush-Joseph, both as a resident and a fellow. What is your approach for mentoring junior partners, junior faculty? Because this is a little bit nuanced, because they're your partner, they're on your team, but they're also competition in private practice settings and in some academic settings. They're new and they're green, but they're probably hungry and eager to get going. What's your approach for mentoring them? Dr. Bush-Joseph, let's start with you. You've had a recent new hire in the last couple of years, and you've seen a lot of new hires over the years. How do you take them on?
I think the first thing, and Bernie Bach told me the first thing, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And usually when fellows come out of training, they want to sprint, they want to run fast. And so they can get overly aggressive sometimes, and they make aggressive decisions because they're trying to finish the race too soon. And so it's hard that you want to keep them settled, but have set incremental goals. Where do you see your practice being in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years? What kind of relationships with your ancillary staff do you expect to have? Is it purely professional or cordial, or semi conversational and overly friendly? What are the establishments that you want to have with your competitors? I can tell you, young surgeons who've come into town and immediately start trashing competitors, I got to tell you, that fails miserably in virtually every scenario, because your competitors will do the same to you. And so you have to see that it's a big world. There's a lot of more patients than there are surgeons. There's a lot of patients who need good care. And so you can always enhance your practice, not at the expense of someone else. If you're doing it at the expense of someone else, I will tell you, it's going to come back to bite you.
Dr. Keener, how about you? How about, you were mentioning this a little bit before in terms of some of the new hires. How do you approach that when they get in there? And, are you one of those mentors? I'm assuming you are, from all the things Pete's told me about you. You're available at 2 a.m. if they have a call, when they're on call and need some help. How do you approach them as they develop their career and career trajectory at WashU?
I think the important thing is to meet with them regularly. I think we try to establish monthly meetings for a while, and then quarterly meetings just to discuss how their practice is developing. I think it's important to make sure that they have the resources that they need to build the practice that they want. That's probably one of the biggest concerns of a new graduate is building a clinical practice. The other thing is kind of is understanding their long-term career goals, and then can we meet some goals at maybe 3 years and 5 years, setting milestones to get them to that end point, and that usually involves involvement in the society, establishing paths of research that will be meaningful that they can build upon. So the key is just meeting with them regularly, getting feedback, building their practice, making sure they have the infrastructure and resources to execute their research, collaborating with them on the research, serving as a mentor for them we have a master's in clinical science that most of the new faculty obtain. So being a mentor with their research projects with that, just meeting with them regularly and getting feedback from them, giving them advice. Just that regular interaction carries a lot of weight, especially early on in their practice. Not only does it help them build their practice, but it reinforces with them that you're an ally for them, and you will be an active mentor for them all the way through as they reach their career goals. So that's probably the most important thing. Is just regular interaction.
I would just add one thing. I think Peter and I had this conversation before we came on the air. I don't think I said the word no until I was about 44, 45 years old. And that's a hard one. And, maybe this is an old guy talking. Again, we said, oh, you never say no. And we say the young millennials or Gen Zs or Gen Ys or whatever, have a different lifestyle and approach. But, when it comes to your professional development, honestly, you can't say no till you're in your mid 40s. And if you do that too early or too often, people stop asking. So that's a tough one, how to measure and how to manage. But your default answer should be yes to virtually every question until you can really justify a no because it's quote unreasonable or the timing is just impossible. So.
I wanted to ask you a question, Dr. Pestrosa, about that specifically, because I think one of the things that can be really challenging early in practice is whatever walks through the door in your clinic, you're like, I'm going to handle this. So whatever, disaster, non-union, no glenoid left case that comes in, you say, okay, well, I'm the guy, I'm going to do this. And then often, as junior faculty, you don't have enough OR time. You're there on a Friday night at 7 p.m. starting the case. Maybe you have the fewest resources. You don't have a fellow. You have like the intern, or maybe you don't have anyone to help you. What advice do you have for junior faculty as they approach those portions of their career? Because I think that's often when things can go wrong. How do you mentor someone about those kind of situations?
Peter, I think that's probably the most critical thing that I think that people listening to this conversation tonight can really take away. I think you have to have two things. Number one, you have to have a mentor that's either in the group or outside of your group. So in your department, you do have to establish relationships. Dr. Keener, I know his daughter's getting married tomorrow night, but I've got to ask him some questions. I'm not asking him to come in and help me, but I just need his advice on what to do and how to manage these situations. Junior faculty, their testosterone or too much estrogen or whatever gets them to the point to say any ask of a question is a sign of weakness, and that's the wrong answer. That is the old days when I grew up, and that was the wrong approach. And the second thing is, if you feel that you're over abusing your local mentor, you're the local person that you need for guidance and short term and quick answers. Yeah, so that's where the fellowship director comes into play. And I can tell you, having been training over 120 fellows, I get lots of phone calls from lots of people at various times who just want they just want a touch point to say, did I make a good decision, or how would you approach this? And we can either have a brief conversation or a little text message. And many times I'll say that, don't do that. Or, I'll say that, no, yes, this can wait 3 or 5 days. Make sure you're set. Because unfortunately, all of us at some point, and I don't want to speak for Dr. Keener, but I made those rash decisions, got myself in trouble. And I got to tell you, I've been in practice 34 years, and I can remember those cases to the moment, what happened and when, and the bad decision I made at that moment. And you want to minimize those things. And so I think I was too young and too aggressive to say I'm weak and didn't want to show my weakness. And I think that was totally the wrong approach at the time. So make those phone calls, get guidance. That's what partners are for. That's what senior faculty are for. You're not going to drag Jay away from his daughter's wedding, but he'll give you a good direction that I think that you would benefit from.
Yeah, I would agree completely with those statements. I mean, it's not a sign of weakness to ask a senior partner or a mentor in the department some advice on a case, and circling back and making sure that you've developed a plan. Having said that, I think that we've all had those times when we've been stuck doing tough cases on off hours, and I think that it's okay if you feel like you can tackle that, to go ahead and take on that case, understaffed, sometimes with a junior resident. I think the more and more you do that, the more confidence you build, as long as you recognize what your limitations are. But faculty members pay attention to junior faculty that are the quote unquote yes people that will take on the tough cases and will do a good job. And more importantly, be a good physician. Will follow the patient all the way through, will handle the complications, will own up to the complications. That's how you build a practice, whether you're in private practice or in academics, is your willingness to handle the tough cases and to be a great physician all the way through every episode of care. And it's okay to struggle. It's okay to do that at off hours. And as you do that over time, you will gain a reputation as somebody that is competent and, more importantly, somebody that makes the right decisions for patients. And that will pay off in spades for you as your practice develops.
One of the things when I'm in a case and it's not going as well as you'd like it to go, or something's different than what you planned, I sometimes will just take a pause for the cause and look back and remember a case in residency or fellowship when one of my, senior mentors was struggling through a case as well. And okay, if they struggled, it's okay that I'm struggling and I'm going to get through it. Do you guys now, I mean, you're years and years and years into practice. You've probably seen everything twice over and learned a lot, done a lot of things that you would do now and do differently. Do you still call on friends or your mentors or your colleagues when you need advice on cases? Are there ever cases where that comes up still? Do you have opportunities to talk it out with others when cases don't go entirely as planned? I think sometimes as a more junior faculty, you do get that sense of being a little bit, weak if you have to ask that or have to ask those questions despite what you guys are saying, and you don't want to have to do that. Are there ever times when you guys, even 10, 20, 30 years into practice, is this something that you still do? Do you reflect on cases that are difficult or that don't go as planned? And who do you reach out to when that happens? Dr. Bisjoseph, let's start with you on that.
For me, it still happens. I'll be honest with you, and just maybe there's a word for young surgeons. I freely admit I didn't sleep for the first 3 years. My wife said I would be asleep, but I'd be scrubbing my hands and I'd be sleepwalking. I don't think I had a restless sleep until a good third year in practice. And I don't think I was able to sleep on a complication until my fifth or sixth year in practice. And so that's where I kind of measured myself. So when I was able to sleep on complex situations, and then when I was able to sleep on a complication, then all right, I'm great. I'm a great surgeon. And then, that was good for about 10 years. As Jay said, I thought I did everything, took everything on. I was really good. And then you get to that point where I'm an older established guy. I'm in my late 50s. And then I can't afford to screw it up now. And sometimes that anxiety actually comes back. And as I've gotten older, I have a harder time with complications and failures than I did when I was 48 or 50. And so we all go through that phase in life because, as Jay said before, you're all we do, the only capital we have is our reputation. And so when that reputation is solid and you see it chipping away from the constant rain, you start to feel weak. And so as me, I'm 63, about to be 64. I'm more nervous now than what I was 10 or 15 years ago. And I'll venture to say that's going to happen to you guys as well. Certainly I have a breadth of experiences, but that doesn't make me less nervous. Sometimes makes me more nervous and probably more prepared.
One of the things, I think that's a great question, Rachel. And I think one of the things that I've noticed in my career is is as I've gotten more experience, I've recognized ahead of time when a case is going to be hard, and I have no problems asking colleagues or friends advice on how they would handle a case. But I think I recognize now better than ever when I need to get advice before I start a case. I would say at some point in my middle of my career, when Peter was a fellow with me, it was a unique situation. I was the chief of the service, but I was only 10 years into practice. And I remember Peter and I struggled with a few cases. I remember a lat transfer in particular that was very difficult to harvest the tendon through a posterior approach. And I was sitting there struggling through the case. And I think that looking at it now, I have 5 years later, I have a lot different clinical acumen to figure out different ways to approach a specific problem. And more importantly, I think I recognize now which cases have the pitfalls that are going to get me into trouble. So I would say now more than ever, I'm more willing to ask opinions of colleagues, both whom I work with and in chat groups from other groups in which I belong to. How would you approach this? And getting more directed or pointed advice on a case ahead of time. So I think for those listening to this podcast, there's an evolution that happens as you gain skill and as you get more gray hair that really helps your spider sense, keeps you out of trouble a lot better as you get more seasoned. And I think that is a natural phenomenon. It probably happens to everybody, but it's definitely not a sign of weakness at any point in your career to seek advice, either before a case or during a case. And in fact, your colleagues and your friends will respect you more because it shows a level of thought and understanding that, frankly, not all of our colleagues have. So I think that's an important evolution that you need to recognize that will happen.
And Peter, I'll just add that there's never been a better time to be a young surgeon than now. I mean, the access to information, to video, to consultation is never been greater, and it's only getting greater. And societies like ASES that are exceedingly strong in education and collaboration make it so much better than what it was 15 or 20, or certainly 25 years ago. So I would say that that being a young surgeon now is a great time. I have to tell you, I wish that I could grow up and train in this environment because it's never been better and it'll only continue to get better.
Yeah. Sometimes the best learning opportunities when you're a resident or a fellow is when you're seeing your attending struggle with a case, because not only are you anticipating the problem and thinking about yourself, how you would problem solve it, but you're witnessing them do it live and in action. So I think that there's a lot. Some of the most educational cases are the ones that, I can go through a month sometimes and crank out 50 cases, and every one of them goes as, according to the recipe. But the cases that are the most beneficial is when there's an intraoperative event that happens that forces you to redirect your plan. So there's great value in those cases, and they cause us guys like us to get gray hair and lose our hair at a quicker pace than we want to. But they're also incredible learning opportunities for during your fellowship and your residency.
I wanted to follow up a little bit with you on that. I remember that lat transfer. I remember it because I did it with you, and then I went to the lab to try and look at the anatomy because I could not figure out during the case what we were looking at. And I realized in the lab just how close we were to the radial nerve. And the case actually I remember even better with you that illustrates exactly what you're talking about is we did a cuff together. It was just like it seemed like a standard cuff where we could not visualize. And then you manipulated. Yeah, exactly. And then you manipulated the arm into forward elevation. All of a sudden it became easy. And I tell that story to like every single training that comes through because you made one move that I would never have thought to make that like made the case so much easier. I mean, I think the value of the training that you're bringing up it's not necessarily to watch someone else struggle. It's to watch someone struggle and then to show you this is how you solve this problem. So that was so valuable to me, certainly in that experience. One of the things I wanted to ask you guys is, it's both of you mentioned that you had mentors that were good and bad along the way. Certainly, I think we've all gotten a piece of advice where we try and do something that someone's advised us to do, and we find out later on that it just wasn't the right path for us. What's one thing that you did early on in practice that you no longer do and that you would advise other people not to do?
I'll pat myself on the back. I think I've always been positive, but one thing I can always say, and just in both in management of running a large orthopedic department and in practice, is negative energy. I have to tell you, negative energy in the operating room or in the clinic environment is never good. Yelling at people doesn't make them work harder. Projecting your own anxiety doesn't make people more enabling of you. And I think nowadays, we're much better about that. Surgeons are much better coached about their behavior and how people react to their behavior. So you always have to, when you see people that have negative energy and project negative energy, you just say, I'm going to make sure I don't do that, because you see how it doesn't foster progress in a narrow or tight situation. If anything, it takes people the other way. So I have a saying that it's certainly in the operating room, emotion is the enemy. If you're getting emotional, you're in a losing position. So just always take your own pulse. So
I think that's really good advice. I think the way you project yourself in the OR is critical, and I think that even one of the things that I've been able to do, I don't know what attribute, I mean, what allows a person to do this, but I think when you're in a tough case and you're struggling or there's a complication, just remaining calm and staying steadfast in your thoughts and getting through it in a kind of peaceful, methodical manner, it makes a big difference. It's people remember that, and the OR staff remembers that, and I think that carries a lot of weight into who you are in the OR. And the other thing that I think that a lot of times, I work in a tertiary referral practice, and I see a lot of complications or cases that maybe weren't handled the right way the first time around. And I think early in my career, a lot of times, a lot of times you get caught up in the discussion sometimes with the patient about, was there an error made, or was this, could this have been done better? Was this the right surgery, et cetera? I think one of the most important things that I've learned is to kind of try to circumvent those questions and just realize that a lot of times that you're not there in the moment of the original surgery. You don't know what the thought processes are. We all have our own complications, and it's very easy to second guess previous surgeons, and you should try to get out of that mantra. I think you should stick with doing what's best for the patient at that given moment in time and give the benefit of the doubt to the person that originally executed the surgery. I think that carries a lot of weight. And I think that a lot of the referring providers appreciate when you can give an objective opinion and try to rise above all of the causation issues that sometimes patients will try to drag you into.
Peter, I've had a saying that I think Rachel has heard probably too many times. I think early on in medical school, we learned that the ABCs, and while it's not airway, breathing, circulation, it's arrive on the situation, assign, blame, and criticize. And you really have to fight that. And I always say this, that lawsuits aren't started by lawyers; they're started by doctors. When you walk into a room, said, "Who did that? Why'd they do that to you?" I know we're getting a little bit short on time. And one other thing that I do think that helps in difficult situations, I'm always a guy that is a list guy, and I think in threes. So I always want to have three options on if I hit a roadblock, what are the three paths that I can take? Do I make a bigger incision? Do I make another portal? Do I change my portal? Do I change my positioning? I'm always thinking, what are the three things that I'm going to do when I approach every fork in the road? And I think having that, say, oh, well, this one worked pretty well, but next time if I've got a difficult dissection or an unusual exposure, well, let me try a different approach on that. And I think having that sets of three where, all right, I got one, didn't work, let's try two, what's three? Always having that list in your head ready to roll if you hit that roadblock, I think is a good mantra that when you get into a case, And I always laugh about that. I think as shoulder and elbow surgeons, we're not total knee guys where they're doing the same operation 500 times a year and maybe they do a couple revisions. I think that's the pleasure of what we do, that we do a variety of situations, and that's what makes us fun. And yeah, if I'm a total joint guy, I just get to think about metal and polyethylene. Whereas I think in what we do, we've got a variety of circumstances that we play in, and we can be excited every time we go to work.
We are getting a little short on time, but I think, we Pete, I got to ask you while Dr. Keener's here, what's the best piece of advice your mentor, Dr. Keener, has given you live on the air? He's listening. What is it?
Well, aside from correctly advising me that Bob Dylan is not a rock star, he's a folk artist. One of the people that, if you haven't worked with Jake Keener, one of the benefits of working with him is you learn a lot about music in the operating room. But one of the I don't know that Jake Keener directly gave him this advice, but it's by far one of the more important things he taught me, if he never directly said it. Jake Keener was really instrumental in helping me to get this job that I have, that I feel very fortunate to have. And one of the things that he told me when I got this job is he said, you're joining someone who's going to be a good partner. And when he told me that, I thought a lot about it, and I've taken it to heart to try and do my best to be the same, because I think it's really important. And one of the things that I watched with Jake Keener is that he lived it. I mean, even if he didn't tell me you need to be a good partner, I watched him be a good partner and a good mentor to everyone in that division, and now to lead that division to great new heights. So that, to me, that was by far the most important thing that's been so instrumental in my thinking about the way I approach situations, especially in a group setting.
Thank you, Peter.
What about you, Rach? What do you think was the most important thing you learned from your mentor, Dr. Joseph?
Well, there are too many to count, by far, for sure. But I think it's a tie between two. One thing, and he said this a lot, I'm sure he still says it to residents and fellows coming through, but as a sports med doc, don't be a left-hand, little finger only surgeon. Be a sports med doc, be their doc, be their physician, be there for your patients. And I think it really stems from a lot of the things he's mentioned tonight, and that, you don't say no. Your patient that you've done their ACL and their grandma calls you, or they call you because their grandma has, a fall and hurt her back, figure it out, take care of them, be there for them. You might not be the person to ultimately treat them, but you're getting the phone call and they've placed their trust in you. And so, don't be a left-hand little finger only surgeon. Make sure that you are taking care of the whole patient, the whole athlete and their families. And that's why, I tell everyone, when I grow up, I want to be like CBJ. That's the kind of doctor I hope I have become and am becoming, someone who takes care of the whole patient in front of you. So I think that's the best piece of advice, and we kind of live it every day. The last thing, or the other thing I would say, is the mantra: motion is lotion, ice is nice, weight is great. I tell that to every single patient, and I say, this is what my mentor told me, so I'm going to tell you it seems to work. And they kind of laugh, and I laugh, and it just brings it on a level that we can all understand, kind of stops the doctor talk and just talks as two humans talking to each other about a problem. And it just, I don't know, it makes you more human, I think, to your patients. So in summary, CBJ has taught me to be hopefully just a little bit more human, a little bit more normal, and not just a doctor with a white coat, but someone who takes care of people. And so I'm grateful for that. So thank you, CBJ. Appreciate it.
One thing that I think that's those are great statements. I will tell you that one of the benefits of being a mentor is that your mentees end up teaching you a lot themselves. So the great thing about academic medicine is you get to mentor a lot of people. But I can tell you that I learned a lot from Peter. I learned a lot from every fellow that's come through. And it's really a privilege to be able to mentor so many people. Not only do you shape their career, but you end up learning a lot from them, and you form lasting friendships that will carry on forever. So it's really a privilege to be in a situation where you get to train future leaders, especially people that are exceptionally talented. And Rachel and Peter, you guys are two great examples of that. So you should be proud of yourselves.
And Peter, I just want to add to that point. Even if you're not going into academic practice, I think it is critical to stay engaged with your colleagues. They may be your competitors, but they're still your colleagues. And yes, I may be in a not a very big city, in a small city where there's 5 or 6 shoulder trained guys. I think you still, I see that in Chicago, and I see that in other markets. Develop that association, because again, you still have the common goal, and then having that club that you're part of will carry you a lot longer. If you find yourself isolated, you're really in a difficult situation. And so, and I hate to say the other thing, that guy who's your competitor someday may be your partner. The way the orthopedic world is changing, I think you want to find more friends, and do everything you can to find friends, especially friends that are like you and do what you do. So.
Well, I want to thank both of you for coming and doing this with us. I know both of you are very busy, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you giving us all this advice, and I'm sure our listeners will really appreciate all of your sage wisdom. So thank you again for coming on. This has been great.
That's about all the time we have for this podcast today. We want to thank our guests so much, Dr. Bush-Joseph and Dr. Keener, mentors, colleagues, and friends for life. We've benefited so much from your guidance and mentorship over the years, and our current and future trainees, as well as our current and future patients, are all benefiting too. So thank you both so much. And for all of our shoulder and elbow listeners out there, please don't forget to subscribe. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.